The visual is not important here. The music is not important here. The voice is not important here. What matters are the words. If you cannot listen to the words, you do not belong here. If you understand this, welcome to the Fate Club. There is a moment that does not announce itself, a moment that does not arrive as rebellion, anger, or awakening, but as a quiet malfunction in the internal system that once responded automatically to titles, roles, uniforms, signatures, and voices that previously carried unquestioned weight, where commands used to move through the body without resistance, producing obedience before reflection, reaction before choice, and alignment before understanding, and this moment often passes unnoticed. Because nothing dramatic happens on the surface, yet internally something subtle detaches, as if gravity itself has weakened without collapsing, leaving structures intact but strangely lighter. Authority does not disappear all at once, it does not crumble or shatter, it simply stops pulling with the same force, and what once felt heavy, inevitable, or final begins to feel informational rather than directive, as if the organism starts processing hierarchy the way it processes weather, noticing it without needing to submit to it. And this shift is not ideological, not moral, and not chosen, but emerges as a biological recalibration where the nervous system no longer recognizes external command as a survival signal. In earlier conditions, authority functioned as an external stabilizer, a borrowed certainty that reduced cognitive load by outsourcing decision-making to structures that promised safety, continuity, and order, and the body learned early that alignment with authority reduced friction, reduced threat, and increased predictability, embedding obedience not as belief, but as reflex, and for a long time this reflex worked because the environment rewarded it with coherence, identity, and a sense of place within a visible ladder of cause and effect. But when the environment changes faster than authority can adapt, when rules lag behind lived reality, and when systems begin repeating instructions that no longer correspond to actual conditions, the reflex starts misfiring, producing fatigue instead of safety, confusion instead of clarity, and a quiet dissonance where following no longer guarantees relief. And this is where authority begins to lose its gravity, not because it is challenged, but because it stops working at the level of regulation it once occupied. The body notices first, often long before language does, through delayed reactions, reduced urgency, and an absence of the familiar internal contraction that once accompanied directives, deadlines, and declarations, and this absence is not defiance, but neutrality. A state where commands arrive but fail to trigger the cascade of stress hormones that once translated words into movement, compliance, or fear, leaving behind a space where something else might occur, though nothing is yet named. This loss of gravity does not produce freedom in the dramatic sense, because freedom implies direction, intention, and replacement, while this state produces suspension, a hovering between response and non-response, where authority is still visible, still audible, still structurally present, but no longer central, no longer unquestionable, and no longer capable of organizing identity around itself, resulting in a strange experience where one can hear instructions clearly and yet feel no internal pressure to internalize them. Institutions continue to speak in the same tones, using the same symbols, rituals, and claims, but the listener has changed, and what once felt like law now feels like narrative, what once felt like obligation now feels like suggestion, and what once felt like inevitability now feels optional, not because choice has been asserted, but because compulsion has dissolved, leaving authority intact but hollow, like a structure whose doors remain open, but whose interior no longer holds gravity. This transition often creates unease, not relief, because the organism was built to orient around external anchors, and when those anchors lose weight, the system must reconfigure without instruction, without guidance, and without precedent, producing a period of disorientation where the old map still exists but no longer aligns with the terrain, and yet no new map has formed, leaving the individual suspended in a space where action slows and observation increases. During this phase, conflict loses urgency, arguments lose heat, and proclamations lose their ability to provoke immediate alignment or opposition, because authority no longer defines meaning automatically, and without that shortcut, the mind begins processing inputs more slowly, more locally, and more independently, not as a philosophical stance, but as an adaptive response to overstimulation and contradiction, where conserving energy becomes more important than proving correctness or loyalty. The loss of authority's gravity does not mean chaos follows, despite what older systems predict, because gravity is not the same as structure, and when gravity weakens, structure can remain while allowing for flexibility, nuance, and recalibration. And this is where a quieter form of order begins to emerge, one not imposed from above, but arising from direct perception of consequence, where behavior is guided less by rule and more by resonance with reality, as it is experienced moment by moment. This shift also alters the relationship to time, because authority once organized time into schedules, milestones, and urgencies that demanded synchronization, and when authority loses weight, time loosens, becoming less linear and less coercive, allowing attention to linger where it naturally rests rather than where it is instructed to go. And this can feel like laziness or disengagement from the old perspective, while from within it feels like a reduction in unnecessary acceleration. Many mistake this state for apathy, but apathy implies loss of care, while this is a redistribution of care away from abstract demands toward immediate experience, where the organism prioritizes internal coherence over external compliance, and where meaning is no longer derived from alignment with authority, but from the absence of internal resistance, even if that absence is not yet understood or trusted. As authority loses gravity, identity also begins to loosen, because identity was often shaped in response to approval, recognition, and permission, and without the gravitational pull of external validation, roles become optional rather than defining, allowing the self to exist without constant reference to how it is positioned within a hierarchy, and this can feel like emptiness at first, because the scaffolding that once held the sense of self upright is no longer carrying weight. This emptiness is not a void to be filled, but transition space where the organism recalibrates its orientation to reality, learning to respond to conditions directly rather than through inherited frameworks. And during this time, silence becomes more frequent, not as withdrawal, but as a natural consequence of reduced need to perform, justify, or defend, because authority no longer requires constant acknowledgement to maintain internal stability. The most unsettling aspect of this shift is that it cannot be reversed through effort, belief, or recommitment, because once gravity is lost, pretending it remains only creates strain, and the system instinctively avoids that strain by disengaging from performative obedience, choosing instead a slower, more observational mode of existence where authority is seen clearly but not absorbed, respected perhaps, but no longer internalized as a source of truth or direction. This does not produce superiority, rebellion, or enlightenment, because those still rely on authority as a reference point, and here authority simply fades into the background, becoming one influence among many rather than the organizing principle of perception, and in this background position it can still function when useful, but it no longer dominates, no longer commands attention by default, and no longer defines the boundaries of what feels possible or permissible. Over time, this loss of gravity stabilizes into a new baseline where responsiveness becomes selective, engagement becomes intentional, and obedience becomes situational rather than automatic, not as a political act, but as a biological necessity, in an environment saturated with signals, demands, and contradictions that exceed the capacity of any single authority to regulate meaning effectively. What emerges is not independence in the heroic sense, but a quieter form of autonomy where the organism trusts its own capacity to sense alignment and misalignment without needing constant external calibration, and this trust grows slowly, unevenly, and without milestones, revealing itself only through the absence of panic where panic once lived, and the absence of urgency where urgency once dictated movement. Authority does not need to be destroyed for this to occur, nor does it need to be exposed or opposed, because its loss of gravity is a natural consequence of changing conditions, not a failure of legitimacy. And as the environment continues to evolve, authority adapts or fades, while the organism continues adjusting internally, learning to live without the constant pull of external command shaping every reaction, decision, and identity. This state is not an ending, not a solution, and not a destination, but a phase of recalibration where the weight of authority is redistributed, allowing perception to settle closer to direct experience, and where silence becomes a functional space rather than an absence, holding the residue of old structures without needing to replace them immediately. If you understand this, welcome to the club.